Hey, all, thanks for being with us here today. And it's a pleasure to be here with two great guys from the school district, and George and Scott. And George is the school superintendent. George, you guys have some big news for what you're trying to do. Kind of tell us what's going on in your world and what's coming up.
Thanks for having us, Brent. George Mendoza, Superintendent LeGrand Schools. And I am excited to announce that October 5th, we'll be having our K-3 students that selected comprehensive distance learning under the hybrid model. We're now going to be able to have them come back to our schools in-person instruction. So that's going to start on October 5th. We're excited to have them back. We were operating under a model earlier where we were under the case counts of about 9 cases per every, for the 27,000 in Union County's population. We basically had to be at first for 9 cases under for 3 weeks in a row, and we also had this 5% positivity rate that we were looking to be under, and there was a process in that where the data wasn't as accurate as it could be, and so we asked the state for an exception or an allowance and for us to be under the smaller populations category, which is similar to what Elgin and Embler and Cove had. And the state came back this last week and indicated to us that they would allow us to be under the small population bucket so that we could allow for up to 250 of our K-3 students to return. It just so happens that we have less than 250 K-3 students in every school. So Central has less than 250 at this time, Greenwood and Island City, of course. And so we're going to be allowed to bring back our K-3 students under the smaller population county exception. So that's big news.
That's great. And so just for those people that might not understand what you guys have been doing, and I might not have all the terms correct here, students were asked when they were registering for schools that they were going to do, they could either do a full-blown online program that is not connected necessarily to the school district. You guys have, you are accommodating that and embracing that, or they had to commit to being a part of the hybrid. And the hybrid is that under COVID restrictions, they would be using LeGrand School District teachers and would be coordinating their education via online live sessions. And now that the restrictions are lifted, or you've found a way through them, then those students that are on the hybrid can now come back to school. Is that a pretty good explanation?
Yeah, I'd say that's a fairly accurate way to describe. We are able now to have students that selected hybrid, and it was also, so it's a combination of comprehensive distance learning and also on-site education. So that was the hybrid platform. K-3 are now going to have the opportunity to come back in a stable cohort. They'll be able to work with the teacher, same teacher all day. They'll have recess and they'll have lunch in a grab and go format, and they'll have recess with their cohort as well. Assigned zones, assigned locations. But the concept, of course, is that once you selected comprehensive distance learning, you also in that hybrid format selected to be in person once school could be allowed in person. And for our K-3, we now have the ability to have them back in our schools from 8 o'clock to 1 o'clock every day.
Okay, and briefly explain what a stable cohort is and what is the purpose of that.
So a stable cohort is when a class is with the same teacher or the same group as well all day. They might have a teacher rotate if they do have explorers or others that may come in or work with them, but for the most part, the concept of stable cohort is staying together all day with your cohort. And so they do language arts and math and science and social studies and PE, and they do recess. They do things together as a class. You're allowed to have up to 50 students mixing total. When in terms of two cohorts, there could be a potential bus cohort, and then there's the classroom cohort in this model. And it's one of those ways where you do screenings, you do contact tracings, you basically know where every student is at any given time and who they've been with. So if there is an outbreak or an event that takes place and you need to identify the locations, it makes it very easy for contact tracers to understand where they've been and understand how to mitigate or control any type of outbreak.
Great, I understand that. Okay, well, Scott, why don't you talk to us about the schedule? And for those people that might not be familiar with the elementary schools in the area, tell us what those schools are also, but kind of tell us what the plan is for parents of these K-3 kids that are going to go back to school.
Yeah. So currently in comprehensive distance learning, Island City, Central Elementary, and Greenwood have been operating basically from 8 to noon, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, with interventions and other small groups happening on Wednesday. We're excited that in the coming hybrid model that starts on October 5th, that our K-3 students can access 5 days a week. So there won't be that Wednesday that's a little bit different. They'll be at school 8 to 1, Monday through Friday. It's a little bit different schedule than what parents might have been used to last year before March. Their kid would have, or their student would have stayed in school until about 2:20, 2 o'clock, 2:20, somewhere in there. But we needed more time to be able to provide distance learning for families that, you know, maybe they're in quarantine or they're sick or they have some short-term illness, that teachers are going to need to communicate with those families and to provide our custodians more time to clean so that every day students are entering into a clean classroom and facility. So it is a little bit of a modified schedule, but we're excited to be serving kids 5 days a week. Most days they'll get English with interventions, they'll get math with interventions, and then they'll be rotating through science or social studies or art. They'll continue to get their special, and then they'll get some good social emotional time and lunch served. So a good, well-rounded program for that shortened schedule.
And all of this is available in a document that is available. I mean, tell us where people can get the details for that.
So we've created a series of documents. I'll just say a supplemental document for K-3 families in particular that the district is releasing today via the website and Facebook. It references another bigger document behind it called the Reopening Guide or Handbook, and it walks the family through the schedules, it walks them through safety procedures, basically anything and everything to do with how we operate school this year. There's also behind that one a communicable disease plan and some of our blueprints that we've had to submit to the state to be able to operate during this time. So there's about 4 layers of documents that we update when we create these types of programs or different things. And right now we're just excited to be able to get them back.
And so, and I'm sure that if parents have a specific question about their specific need, they can contact the school or the teacher. They already have, they've been doing that learning through this other means, this other online means. And so they can just use that same channel to funnel some of those questions that they might have. Is that the case?
Absolutely. In fact, this is sort of our first just a big announcement. The school buildings, all Island City, Central, and Greenwood will be doing their own communication about details on arrival, dismissal, and all other aspects of operating school day to day. So there'll be a lot of communication going out this week so that families can feel prepared for October 5th.
So it sounds like a little bit, other than it starts at 8 and ends at 1, for the most part, it's similar to what they have been experiencing in past few years. I mean, along with it's COVID, you know, and they've got other, but I mean, as far as their schedule is concerned, they're, you know, they can accommodate their days knowing that they're going to be able to get their child to class at 8 a.m. and they're going to have to pick them up at 1. Is that, I mean,
I'll answer that, Brett.
okay.
As it relates to a schedule and activities and learning, yeah, it's going to be fairly similar, but the difference is there's a lot of safety changes that we have to implement that make it harder for students in general to share materials or share supplies or share resources. So it's not going to be as hands-on every moment as it may have been in the past. We're using Google platform as well. So we have this, we have our content as well, where teachers are teaching and using Google assignments and Google lessons and Google activities. They'll definitely be able to do things in person, hands-on as well. But just know when we have the asynchronous side with other students at home, some of those lessons need to be uploaded and videos need to be uploaded. Different things will take place. But it's not exactly like you used to have school in this environment for us. Definitely learning and talking and doing and touching things, of course, but not as much sharing and a lot of use of technology, a great use of technology this time around. And
so the coordination of the classroom material, the assignments, all of that will, I mean, in my understanding, that will continue to be the same whether they're in person or let's say they have a cold and they're staying home. I mean, is that communication network that will continue to be the same thing whether they're in class or at home? Is that true?
Yeah, I would say that teachers are still, their focus is on all the kids that are assigned to them. If they notice a kid is not in class that day, they're going to reach out to that family. They might just reach out to all of them at the same time through Google Classroom and make sure that they do it that way via video and the uploaded assignments. Or that teacher, if it's 1 or 2 that are at home, might choose to make a phone call, talk to the kid individually or the family individually, and be able to share assignments and tasks that way. There's a little bit of flexibility for teachers to really focus on the kids in front of them, but then to be able to make sure that they make contact with all their kids in the afternoon through that asynchronous or non-live distance outreach that we've been talking about.
And that's cool. I mean, that is, I know that you guys have gone to a tremendous amount of work to be able to accommodate shifting students, essentially. I can only imagine how complicated that is. And so, and I'm sure, I mean, you guys have all just survived in this climate like all of us. You have a much greater assignment to educate the public and so on and so forth. But there isn't any doubt that the education will be better for them in person. I mean, that's a really cool thing.
Yeah, we're excited to have our children back and hopefully create a little sense of normal or a sense of routine and create those connections, those relationships, especially K-3. I think a hands-on, in-person, next-to education for K-3 is a big deal for our students, for our staff, for our families, and we're really happy to be able to do that. But we also need to, I think you asked or you said some things that have to do with illness or communication with illness, and we definitely have lots of procedures and practices in place to increase safety for our organization and to increase safety for the students and the staff that are impacted. And definitely we need students to stay at home if they have any kind of sickness, any cold, any illness. We'll be in this kind of heightened state of awareness and alert for everybody. And we really don't want to have any illnesses take place in our schools. So, we're telling our employees to stay home if they feel ill. We're going to ask students often, and we need our parents' help with that as well. We have a lot of practices that we're going to be implementing: screening procedures, monitoring supports, isolation rooms. We're going to have, people need to wear their personal protective equipment. They need to have face coverings. We have 6 feet of spacing everywhere for physical distancing. We're going to have places to do hand sanitation and wash hands regularly. There's a lot of things going on. So it's going to be, again, a little bit different than what it used to be. And a lot of it has to do with increased safety and safety operations. And, you know, we have a symptoms checklist document that we use on any kind of symptom that a staff member or a student brings that helps us make decisions. We have COVID case scenarios documents that we use that helps us determine what our next steps are. If students have COVID cases in the building or COVID cases at home or COVID cases that took place over the weekend, same for staff, anything that happens in the building, outside the building, during the school day, we have a variety of safety operations and procedures that we use. And so there's a lot of work that's been going on to organize ourselves in dealing with students and staff that are sick, but also in mitigating situations. So we'll be extra safe this school year. And that's something I think folks need to realize that we're doing in terms of operations.
And that standardization, I would imagine, is across all of the schools. So those forms, all of that stuff is going to happen in all of those places. Scott, why don't you walk us through what can a student or a parent expect? You know, what's that experience going to look like for them when they come into the school?
Yeah, so first I want to piggyback on what Superintendent said. And one of the things that gives me a lot of hope is that we expected case counts to go up. Ambler and Elgin and Union and Cove got to go back to school, and we didn't see that. And we saw them do the key safety practices that I'll talk about in a minute, and the case counts stayed really low. And so I'm really impressed with how effective these are, and that if our families and our students follow these safety practices throughout the day, that we're not going to see lots of cases of COVID, that we'll be able to keep cohorts, keep kids safe. First, all I'll say is that when kids come to school, we're asking them, or we've asked them multiple times, to consider busing. Buses are one way that we can help limit exposure. So if families want to transport their own student, we would encourage that. But we also, if families need busing, we need them to contact Mid-Columbia Bus Company right now. There's a link on the document that we're releasing today that will help them to speed up that process so that they can have busing on October 5th. They'll get to school throughout this week. The administration and the teachers will be communicating what entrance students need to enter in, so that there's no big group that's massing at the front door. That seems counterintuitive to trying to keep kids safe and social distance. So we're going to break them up to different doorways. They'll be collected by a staff member, and we'll be teaching the protocol of how do you stay 6 feet apart, how do you do that in lines. They'll get to their classroom, and at that point they'll sanitize their hands, and they'll do a morning meeting and a get to know you, rebuild some of those relationships that they've missed out on for the last 7 to 8 months. And then they'll get to do English and math like they normally would. It might feel a little different in that the desks are a little bit further apart. They can't elbow each other or do some of those things. But they'll be able to get to do learning. Their specials, so PE or music, will come into the classroom and be able to share some of those other well-rounded content areas with them. Lunch will feel a little bit different. Lunch will be delivered to their classroom, and so that they can eat while they're 6 foot distance. There's things in the guidance called masked breaks. And so this will be one of those times where students will be asked to take off their mask and be able to eat their lunch. As soon as they're done, they'll put their mask back on, re-sanitize their hands. And then we're looking at different ways to address recess. We understand kids need physical break, and how we can rotate through the field or other places, or even do stretch or different breaks within the classroom, so that kids can get rid of some of that energy that they certainly will accumulate being in the classroom. And then we'll leave the same way we came in. We'll be doing a staggered sort of release so that these cohorts aren't mixing. We'll get them to the bus. We'll get them out to the appropriate exit where their family can then plan on them coming out. We'll ask them to go straight to their parents' vehicle so that they're, again, not disrupting some of that contact tracing and creating the need for more for additional exposure. I'll just say it that way. And then we'll go from there. And hopefully what we've seen at the other schools is that they're able to navigate that process. They've been doing extremely well in doing that, and that hopefully the same is true here in LeGrand, and that we have healthy and safety environments for healthy environments for all of our kids.
That's good. And some of these kids have changed grades. I mean, all of them have. If they're coming back to school, they're, and they were in second grade last year, they're coming back into third, or you have preschoolers that are now kindergartners for the first time. And wow, my hat is off to those teachers that, I don't know how they've been doing that across a computer screen for the last several weeks, but even now, I mean, can you imagine trying to keep 6 feet buffer between 5-year-olds? I mean, I learned a while ago that they don't know how to walk in a line when they first come to school, and so anyhow,
it's going to be fun. And I'll just say that I have much more hope than I have fear.
Right.
We have lots of different illnesses or cold or flu or lots of different things that happen in humanity. School is an essential need to just be around other people and to be learning. And I think right now that's a better therapy or medicine than maybe the computer screen can be. So I'm excited that they're coming back. We're going to do 6 feet to the extent possible. We recognize that throughout the entire school day, even though it's shortened, that there's going to be times when we can't put this magical sort of force field around everyone that we're going to maintain 6 feet all the time, but we're going to do the best we can, knowing that kindergarten through third graders just love to be around each other. So we're going to do the best we can for all of our kids to maintain that. That's
right. Well, and I tout this fairly often, and that is that if you look at the COVID stats and the number of deaths of people under the age of 25, it's practically not measurable. And so, really probably the risk is more to the staff than it is the actual kids, just because of the way the stats all shake out. So, we take a risk when we cross the street. And so it's just how our world today is. We have to mitigate some of those risks that we're taking. And I mean, it's exciting. That's cool. I can only, as a parent, imagine how excited some of them might be to see this happening.
Yeah, I was at the Booster Club tournament this last Saturday, and as a parent came by, their first question was, I heard K-3 is coming back. Is that true? And as soon as I said yes, they were ecstatic. So I hope that that's the reaction of our community. I feel like it is, and the people we're talking to. Superintendent has a little bit better picture of that. I think for us, Brent, you mentioned statistics. I think as we teach our little guys and gals about this, it's about keeping everyone safe because we care about our community.
Right.
We care about, our staff and our teachers, and that we all have, this is a great way to teach civics in some little way. Even though they might be less susceptible to COVID, that we're trying to keep everyone safe and build community. We're concerned about the one. I'll just say that, if we were to lose a kid to COVID, that's hot on our mind as we make these decisions, but we know we need to make this step to get kids back to school.
Yeah. So what do parents need to send with their kid? That's what do they need to, they're dropping them off. Do they need to provide a mask for them, or what? Maybe talk about that a little bit.
So they definitely need to be wearing a mask or face covering. And we'll work with families if there's some medical condition. There's some accommodations that we can make. Most of them involve a face shield or some other device that's not directly over your face. They also were given either a backpack if they were at Central or a tote with all their materials when they checked out from Island City or Greenwood. We're asking them to bring those back, and there'll be more specific instructions from the buildings, but most kids will be accessing that tub or that backpack all day long for their individual materials, because we have to limit the amount of sharing that's going to happen between our students. So as long as they bring back their tote, they can put their Chromebook in there, they can put all the materials they've been accessing for the last month, and they bring their mask, they should be good on day one when they come back to school.
And so would you recommend that maybe parents start getting their kids used to wearing masks? I mean, do you have any tips for them there?
I think it's about trial and error. I've heard lots of different parents saying, you know, at first they were very nervous because the state came out back in July and said everyone will wear a mask when they leave their home. And so since July, there's been a lot of trial and error about what type of mask, what type of fabric, what type of size, what does the kid like to wear? Is it their, you know, Tyrannosaurus mask, or is it their, you know, something else that they find that represents who they are? So I think it's finding the right mask for their child. And then, yes, if they've been following the guidelines from the state when they go to Walmart or when they go to stores to wear their mask, I think most of their students are going to be used to wearing their mask when they're in school. And again, we're going to provide opportunities for them to take mask breaks regularly. That's in the guidelines that we can do that, so that they don't have to live in that mask for 5 hours a day without a break. So we're hopeful that they've sort of learned that already, that they found a mask they really like, and that they're ready to go on October 5th.
Good. So we don't have to get into the details, but tell me, there is a plan if there is a case. Maybe talk about that a little bit. If there is a case in a cohort or a school, you know, generally talk about what the plan is, or tell us about that.
Well, definitely, we have a variety of scenarios that we're prepared for. The state of Oregon, actually, Oregon Department of Ed and Oregon Health Authority created a COVID-19 scenario document for school districts, and it has like a 1A, a 1B, a 2A, a 2B, all the way to 7 different scenarios with an A, B, C, D option sometimes on each scenario. And so for us, what we do right away is we identify what's taking place, we identify the symptom, we identify the situation, and then we get into the scenario and all the logistics behind each scenario. So if it involves transportation, we communicate with transportation. If it involves facilities and operations, we can communicate with those that are in facilities operations. We do the investigation questions. We have our nurse show up on site if necessary with staff. If it's staff related and they can go home, we immediately have staff go home, or they don't even come to school, hopefully, if they're letting us know in advance that they're not feeling well. With students, of course, same situation. We're investigating each event. Of course, we don't want students to come to school if they're ill, and we want parents to know that as well. But if it just so happens that they come to school, they're ill, or they come to school and then they develop symptoms during the school day, again, process for what we would do, isolation room, getting a hold of household members, limiting exposure, doing our contact tracing, isolating locations and shutting those locations down, cleaning, sanitizing, disinfecting. So we just have numerous operations, tactics, strategies that we implement depending on the case. And then we have kind of a data-driven documentation process on who's doing what does the nurse do, what does the principal do, what does the custodian do, what does the superintendent do, what does HR do, and we just write it down, communicate back and forth, and then we make sure we carry it out and keep everybody safe. So that's the typical process that we're following. We've had over 100 students in our schools already with limited in person. We've had district provided childcare for 75 students for our staff members. We've had limited in person now for about 4 weeks, where we've had over 30 to 50 students coming in that capacity. So we've been testing the way our machine works with safety and operations with staff and with students for a while. So we feel fairly comfortable or confident at least that we have some systems down on how to support students and take care of students and staff safety needs.
Good. And I guess the point is that you know what to do. You guys you have a plan. And so nobody, you know, if there is a case or even if someone's sick, it's not like, well, what do we do? The teacher, I mean,
Yeah.
Every school knows what they're doing. They know what the procedure is.
Yeah, we have many resources, lots of structures, routines, procedures that we follow for keeping everybody safe. And we're excited to, I guess, to take care of people if it comes to that.
Excellent.
Brent, one of the things I want to add, first, Superintendent has been on the phone or with CHD almost daily, if not every other day, working through these scenarios and making sure that we're ready to go when we pull this trigger. I mean, when we bring K-3 back, and that they're a ready partner. So we have that in place. The second is that, and it's something I never thought I'd say in my career, but in COVID scenario or in this type of scenario, we need families to think about the health and safety of their child more so than attendance. There is no boogeyman out there in terms of attendance. If your child is feeling sick or a little bit under the weather, or you just have some concern, there is no demerit. There is no like negative consequence for them staying at home. As long as you, as the parent, or they contact the teacher and say, hey, I'm sorry I missed today. What did I miss? That counts as attendance actually in under the new guidelines. And so there is no sort of negative consequence for not being there. I know the priority for all of our families is I want them there and learning and being around their friends, those types of things. But the more that we can be aware of how our students are feeling and stop them before they come to the building, the better we will be able to sort of navigate and not have all of these classroom closures or COVID scenarios. So just wanted to address the attendance piece for a minute and say, please, it's more important about health and safety than it is about having 100% attendance rate. That's not even something we're looking at this year.
Good. And so what about those parents who might say, hey, I like the way it's been going. I don't really feel good about sending my kid back to school at this point. Is there a way of accommodating those families?
So back on August 6th, we really asked families to make I would say an educated guess, a gut check, as far as do they choose LeGrand Virtual Learning Academy, which is part of our district, by the way. It is our online program. Or were they on this sort of journey with us? Did they want to go and think about going back into the classroom or back and forth as situations changed? And so we did a huge communication effort through the whole month of August to get that information from our families. We recognize that lived experience is a little bit different than what you might have experienced on August 6th. And so there will be a window where families, if they cannot go back into the classroom, they can't get their student back or don't feel safe getting their student back into the classroom in person, where they would be able to transition to LeGrand Virtual Learning Academy for that long term. Now, if it's a short-term thing in terms of illness or quarantine or something like that, we want them to stay with their classroom cohort. But if the family's feeling that this is a long-term decision, that regardless of the circumstance or the safety conditions or whatever, that they're not going to return to that classroom, then we would coach them and advocate that you consider LeGrand Virtual Learning Academy.
I'll piggyback on that from Director Carpenter. And we use the word synchronous and asynchronous quite a bit. And we tried, hard to explain to folks that once teachers have students on site, like they're going to with K-3, we indicated many times that their focus was going to be on the classroom student, that they're going to be doing teaching and learning. And yeah, they're going to use a Google Classroom and a Google platform as best they can, but they're focused on the cohort. They're focused on the safety of the cohort. They're focused on the students and how they're doing in front of them. And those students that are, if they're choosing to stay at home, or even if they have to stay home due to illness, they're going to have an asynchronous experience later on where teachers upload any videos or upload any content. They're not going to, it's too hard to focus on students live synchronously in a video format and then focus kids in front of your face, helping them to do any kind of math or language arts, or even science or social studies, or even social emotional things that are taking place in the classroom. So just want to make it very clear that once teachers have students on site, they're very much focused on the students that are on site. And then later on in the day, that's why we have that extra time from 1 to 3. Teachers will upload content, upload lessons and activities into that asynchronous environment, non-live format, and then help out any students that are in comprehensive distance learning doing things video-based. But again, the reality is once you chose hybrid and you chose in-person learning, we meant it when we said we were going to focus on in-person learning in that model. And if they choose to do LeGrand Virtual Academy and they want a 100% complete, don't come to the classroom experience, then we have that available for everybody. And again, we'll do our best to take care of students and families in that model. But it's too hard to ask a teacher to give 100% to an in-person child in front of them, and then to also focus that much, that hard or that well for students in an online environment. They're going to have to upload content later and then check in on students, which is similar to what we've done when prior to COVID. Teachers would teach the kids that they had in front of them, and then afterwards they would help students that weren't there as best they could. So this is similar to that.
I'd piggyback on that as well to just remind families, because we're a little bit into this conversation, that the change that we're talking about is really only at K-3. That for our grades 4 through 12 families, there's going to be no change to their program right now, that they can expect synchronous learning 9:30 to 2:30, or this distance learning asynchronous recorded format any other time of the day. So nothing's going to change for our grades 4 through 12 kids at this time. We're excited at some point, hopefully, to be able to get them back into school, but right now they're going to continue with comprehensive distance learning like they have for the last month.
Good. And I know teachers, and there might be some people that go like, oh yeah, they're working from 8 until 3 and then they're out mowing their lawn or going for a walk, and it's just, the reality is teachers, they put a lot of time in to make that classroom happen. And I would imagine that there's been a lot of stress on them to, I can't even begin to imagine to try and teach a 5-year-old across a video screen. That's like, you might have you can't talk on, grandpa and grandma can't talk to them on the phone and have their attention any longer than about 3 minutes. How are you going to teach them something else? So yeah. Big kudos to our teachers. So one thing I guess I do, there's a lot of discussion, and I talked with Carrie and CHD about this last Wednesday. A lot of discussion, in LeGrand, about whether masks are necessary or not. And I think for a large degree, as I've gone into stores and gone around, people for the most part have been compliant, but I am beginning to see a downturn in compliance as time goes on. But the bottom line is that if a parent has an attitude about mask not being necessary, their opinion about whether masks are necessary or not is not relevant to their kid going to school and wearing a mask. You guys are just trying to get the schools open with the requirements that are in front of you. And so then, I could imagine that if I were a teacher and I had second graders coming into my class and I have a second grader saying, well, we don't really my dad says we don't really need to wear the mask anyhow, so why am I needing to wear it? I guess just a little bit of preaching to them would be like, don't make life difficult for your second grader. They're going to have to wear a mask at school. That's part of what the hoop is that they're jumping through. You guys want to wade into that at all?
Well, I'll at least share that I do think that, again, you know, if you press me as a superintendent, that I don't just get to deal with a bunch of opinions. And there's times where I do hear opinions from whether it's staff or parents or businesses, or I'll just say elected officials even. And what I look for is, what does it say in law? What does it say in our guidance that I'm supposed to follow? And let's just do that, because I won't do well functioning just on a bunch of opinions that we hear, even if they're well intended. And I have my own opinions as well. So I think in the end, we have to follow the state laws, we have to follow the guidance, and we have to implement that to keep everyone safe. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a researcher. I'm an educator. And I want to make sure that we do a great job of educating our students and following rules and regulations. So I live right there. I would tell families that we're going to follow these rules. We're going to follow the guidance. If they have to go through an accommodation process, we'll walk them through that. And if that involves going to a doctor and then having every single aspect of that done that takes place for a 504 accommodation or some other kind of medical accommodation, then we would do that. But we'll be offering them up until that time, the Grand Virtual Learning Academy, or something to the effect where they are allowed to learn from their home if they're not going to follow our school rules. Now, again, if they're going to work towards an accommodation, our district will be supportive of that process and will facilitate that process, but there has to be a medical need behind that accommodation. And in general, for any of the rules that we have, we need to follow those. You know, I think we went into this spacing of 6 feet. We definitely want 6 feet all the time, but I also want to make it clear, we designed stable cohorts as students coming back into that classroom environment with their groups in a 1 to 35 square feet, because again, that was the regulation that we received from the state. And so we're going to have students in stable cohorts 1 to 35 square feet per student, and that at times isn't going to be 6 feet apart every moment. And then what's going to happen too is we have busing and transportation. And again, I can't tell folks as much. This is probably not the best school year to do transportation because we're not going to follow 1 to 6 feet every second. I don't get to control what happens away at the bus stop 1 to 6 feet when we pick them up or when we take them back home. So if you really want true safety for your own child, it's best to just pick them up and drop them off on your own. Of course, we'll help any family that needs it, that qualifies for transportation services. So we'll be there for a family in need or students that have needs like that. But we have to follow a lot of rules, and we're going to keep following the rules. And it might be, it might make sense at times to a family. Other times it won't make sense because they'll say, you know, this wasn't 6 feet and this was, and I'll say to them, you're right. In this cohort model of 1 to 35, sometimes people are going to be closer than 6 feet. And then when you're doing transportation, sometimes students are going to be closer than 6 feet. We'll keep adjusting and supporting as best we can, but we need to hold people accountable, hold each other accountable to following all of the key practices for safety in our schools. And the best way to hold each other accountable is to follow the rules and communicate.
Good. I get that. And so to reduce that down, George, a little bit about busing. Anyone who's ever ridden on a bus understands that the driver spends, hopefully, most of the time looking at the road in front of them, but they're also glancing up and monitoring the kids that are sitting in their bus. And there's one person doing both of those jobs. And they're not necessarily going to be able to control how close kids sit to each other on a bus. It's just not practical. So if you're concerned about keeping your kid away from other kids during that environment, go deliver them to school yourself and pick them up yourself, or have grandma or grandpa or find someone to do that for you.
Yeah.
But
we do have transportation procedures. So there is assigned seating and assigned spots. So there is definitely going to be process and systems in place. students have to wear masks. There is procedures also that we have in place for where students will sit, and if a student doesn't have, shows any symptoms, that they also be closer to the front so that they don't expose students or do anything towards the back. So it's all staying in front. And there's videos that our school nurses have created that we've sent out in social media and that we also have on our webpage that show the logistics and the operations and the safety procedures for transportation as well.
Good. All right. Well, can you guys think of anything else? George, just give us the announcement one more time so that people that might have clicked into the middle of this, tell us what's happening.
LeGrand School District is pleased to announce that on October 5th, we will be having our kindergarten through third grade students back for in-person learning. And we're excited to get to work with our K-3 students in person. We will someday have our 4 through 12 back. We have to follow state metrics guidelines for that as well. We look forward to that day, and that we're also going to be serving limited in-person students. We continue to serve limited in-person students based on the parameters of that for students that are special needs, students that are titles, students that are in CTE classes, our behavior, our mental health. We have a lot of things going on in our districts where we currently serve students in limited in-person as well. We also have athletics taking place where we have skill development times for our sports as well. So there's a lot of things going on in our school district. We're still in comprehensive distance learning 4 through 12, but we're also going to be serving students K through 3 in person starting October 5th.
Excellent. All right. Anything else you can think of? All right. Hey, thanks a bunch, guys, and appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today.
Thanks, Brent.
Thanks, Brent.